Welcome to the You on the Camino de Santiago podcast. This podcast is for and about first-time pilgrims walking the pilgrimage routes in Spain, France, and Portugal. With your host, guide and longtime pilgrim, Nancy Reynolds of the Camino Experience. I hope you are ready for some pilgrim wisdom today, because I have a bunch of it for you. Hi, this is Nancy, back today with another conversation with a seasoned pilgrim. This time I'm talking with my friend Maurice, who you met in Season 2, Episode 12. Back then, Maurice was preparing for his first Camino pilgrimage on the Frances route. He has since done another Camino and is now preparing for a walk of a different kind. Before he walked his first Camino, Maurice spent some time exploring the question of why he was going to do this pilgrimage. It's a question I recommend every pilgrim ponders. You may not know exactly why you want to walk the Camino, but simply by asking the question, you invite answers that may take you off in new and exciting directions. I love how Phil Cousineau, author of the book The Art of Pilgrimage, says it. He says, "Questions tune the soul. They initiate the quest." What Maurice learned is that the answer to the question, why are you walking the Camino, changes over time, as the pilgrim gains new perspectives from walking the trail. You will get to hear his answers in a few minutes. Maurice has been a longtime supporter of this podcast almost from the beginning, and he has also been tremendously supportive of all the work I do to support first-time pilgrims. Most recently, Maurice helped me with a big project I was working on by proofreading the new ebook series I just launched. People often ask me, when am I going to write a book? Well, this is that book, or more likely, this is my first book. And it solves one of the key problems first-time pilgrims face. See, when you first hear about the Camino, what's the first thing you do? You go online to Google or YouTube or wherever you do your searches, and you type in Camino de Santiago or something similar. Better get comfortable, because you are going to be there for a while. There are tons of information out there about the Camino. It doesn't take long to realize you are deep into this search, intrigued, and possibly feeling inspired, interested, engaged, and curious. But then there comes a point where you realize this is one big rabbit hole. If you are at that point where you found tons of information, you've taken lots of notes, but you don't feel any closer to taking your first steps on the Camino, and you want to take some clear steps toward making the decisions that will ensure your Camino happens, then you are who I wrote this 13 ebook series for. Let me tell you how to learn more about the ebook series. There's a link in the show notes, or you can go to my website, thecaminoexperience.com/start, to find out what steps you need to take first and then next to get your Camino on the calendar. Also, if you've just found this podcast right here at episode 107, and you would like to get the whole story on how to plan and prepare for a pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago, I recommend going back to the beginning to Season 1 and starting there. That way, you will have the whole picture of what you are signing up for when you decide to walk the Camino. Okay, back to Maurice. The other thing Maurice did after reading the, 150 or so pages of the 13 ebooks is he created a couple of Excel spreadsheets for you to use to put together your Camino budget. You know those spreadsheets that do all the math for you? Those. Had I done this myself, it would have taken all day long. But for Maurice, this is child's play, and I think you're going to love these tools. I love it when people take their best skills and use them to help other pilgrims. So that's all included in the ebook series, which, as I said, you can learn about by going to my website. thecaminoexperience.com/start. Last thing, before we meet up with Maurice, if you have decided that you want to walk the Camino in September this year, 2025, but you're having trouble moving forward with your plans, or if you're not all that excited about starting out on this adventure alone, even if you know you want to spend time alone on the trail, or if you find your courage is lagging the more you learn about what's involved in planning and preparing for this pilgrimage, I want you to know that you don't have to do this alone. And if you're stuck, you don't have to stay stuck. How do we make this Camino dream a reality? Together. That's the idea behind the groups I lead in May and September. And I still have 2 spots left in my September group as of March 25th, 2025, when this episode releases. If you'd like to join us or simply learn more, check the show notes for the link to let me know you're interested. Or simply drop me an email at nancy@thecaminoexperience.com. I can't wait to see who takes those final 2 spots. Okay, shall we catch up with Maurice now? Let's do it. Maurice, hi. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm honored to be back.
I've been wanting to do this for quite a while, and you've been off doing some other things. I didn't get to catch you after your first Camino. So
Mhm.
spoiler alert, we're talking after your second Camino. So I think that's pretty fun. So we're going to talk about all of that. Sound good?
Sure, sounds great.
Okay, so let's start with putting the pin in the map where I always like to start. And if you would share with us the details, the where did you walk, when did you start, how long did you take, all of that. And let's start with your first Camino.
My first Camino was the Camino Frances. I started in Saint Jean Pied de Port, September 17, 2023, and I walked into Santiago 36 days later on October 22nd.
So if you were to pull out one thing about that first Camino, what was notable about that Camino?
This incredible sense of community among the pilgrims walking and the people I got to meet. That is unforgettable. And many of those bonds are still alive.
Oh, unforgettable. I love that. I especially like that you and I got to meet up in Saria.
Yes, that was a highlight for me.
That was the best. We got to share that pizza at Mattia's Locanda Italiana, one of my favorite
Hmm.
places. And then to get to share that with someone was just fantastic. Excellent. All right. So let's think back to your first Camino. What was the reason? What drew you to the Camino? Why did you decide to take on this big walk?
When I started learning about the Camino, what struck me the most was the sense of community among the people who had already walked it, and even among people who were thinking about it and planning. And I wanted to belong to that community. And that is one of the big results for me, that I definitely now feel like I am part of the Camino community worldwide, across the centuries, past and future.
Oh, I remember you talking about that before you went, how important that was to you. And I also remember you talking about how connected you were to your local Camino chapter of American Pilgrims on the Camino. Would you share a bit about your involvement with that?
It's a very active chapter, and we have a walk every Tuesday followed by coffee, just like on the Camino. Once a month, we do a longer walk. We have presentations at our local REI hiking supply store, big chain. And I've even actually led one of the monthly walks now. So I've stepped up and I've made a lot of friends there. And this is a shocker. After my first Camino, people coming to learn would ask me questions and I could answer.
I bet that felt great.
It sure did.
You know what? There's something from your first interview that really struck me that I have not forgotten. You asked me, How can I give back? Before you even went to the Camino, you wanted to know how you can give back to the pilgrim community. And I remember we talked about that, different ways for pilgrims to participate in their local chapters and other ways. And then we turned off the recording and you asked me the question. This is the one that just stirred in my soul. You said, Nancy, how can I give back to you? And it just so struck me that that spirit of reciprocity, that spirit
Mhm.
of being part of the community means we give and receive. We give to everybody and we share with everybody. And you, more than anyone I've met, embodies that idea. And I'm just so grateful for that.
Thank you.
So I imagine you on the Camino giving back just left and right, just giving and receiving and being a part of that community.
It gave me so much. And, sometimes it's really little things. I remember one time, I forgot the exact location. I passed a man sitting at a statue. And I knew we had a long time before the next town. And I said, "How are you doing?" And he said, "Okay." And I looked and he had one bottle of water and it was almost empty.
Mm.
And I said, "You're pretty low on water and we're not close to the next village. I have plenty. Would you like some?" And just to be able to share some water was such a meaningful experience. Of course, I never saw that man again. But that I still remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's those moments, it's those little micro connections that we make, I think, that really show us how connected we are and how part of this big community that we are.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So you were seeking that or longing for that or wanting that before you even went,
Hmm.
and then you found it. How did that feel to find it on the Camino?
You know, it's very hard to describe. It was such a visceral experience to have those connections form so quickly,
Mhm.
much more than at home, and deeply, having conversations with people and after a few hours feeling so close to them. Relationships that here at home would take weeks, months, usually to get to that stage. And many of those connections were short-lived. There were people I bonded with, and we might walk for a day or two, and then they're faster, I'm slower, they need a rest day, whatever. And I don't see them again. But that connection was there. And there's still several people I met that I'll get messages from them. I'll check in with them. And that's very, very special.
How do we explain that? Because so many people report exactly that. What's the magic?
Right, right. I wish I knew, but it's a unique experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's something that we want in general in our lives. We want those deeper connections.
That is so important.
Yeah. So if you look back on your first Camino, we talked about why you went, but if you look back from the perspective of you're done,
Mhm.
now what would you say was the reason why you walked the Camino?
I think I had to keep growing, and it was a way outside my normal daily life that I could have different experiences I could not have any other way. And that changes would happen in me over a long period. And, the insights were not immediate. It's not like I walked into Santiago and suddenly I knew. It's still going on. So that need to go forward was part of what drew me in hindsight. And I would not have been able to say that 2 years ago before the walk.
Yeah. Yeah. Something shifts, doesn't it, when you walk the Camino?
It sure does.
Yeah. So, how do you describe yourself now that you would not have described yourself before walking the Camino?
Good question. I think I'm just more in tune with people and I listen more, even more than before. And I can't tell you how important that is to people, just to be heard.
Yeah.
And for myself, one of the changes it took me a while to notice was most of my life I've been very restless. I would fidget a lot. I couldn't sit still. And now I can sit in a chair and just be instead of do.
Oh.
And that's something I never expected and I really like.
How has that impacted you?
I think that stillness has taken some edge off of my daily experience of life. I think I'm less stressed, anxious. Friends tell me that I'm a very calming influence on them. And that is new. That's post Camino.
Okay. I can get that about you. Yeah, I can totally get that about you. What else did you discover about yourself walking the Camino?
You know, I did learn a lot of lessons, and I had to correct myself and say that I relearned many of them because, it just takes me a few times for something to sink in.
Right. I know that
And
plan.
I went to the Camino the first time for community, and the surprising outcome was solitude that I experienced and how much I enjoyed that and how much that enabled me to shift and change internally. And it's not like I never enjoyed being alone before. I certainly did. But the solitude on the Camino, walking for hours, with no contact or minimal contact with other people, was just very different and very impactful.
And that was a surprise to you?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We have an idea when we're heading toward the Camino of why we're doing it and what we want to get out of it. And then the Camino just provides this amazing venue for
Yes.
whatever is going to happen to happen. And sometimes we know what that is, and oftentimes we don't know what that will be. And it seems to me that hindsight is such an important tool here to be able to look back and not judge, I would say
Mhm.
assess or
Yes.
or observe and maybe analyze what has happened. There's gold in there, isn't there?
Yes. And, I had heard about the Meseta and I was so anxious to experience that. And I think that is where I found that solitude and where that shift started happening for me.
Yeah.
That was such
Yeah.
a joy.
And were you anxious as in anxiety or were you eager as in looking forward to it?
Eager looking forward to it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think a lot of us in this day and age when things are so frenetic and we've got this 24-hour news cycle and 24-hour social media, I think we're longing for something. Okay, let's quiet down. And they
yes,
say that the meseta, if you walk the entire Camino Frances, that meseta, that middle section is where you tune into your mind and you start to see what your mind is doing and it starts to just quiet down as you go those long stretches on flat surfaces or relatively flat surfaces. Did you find that to be the case?
yes, very much. That was my experience, but by the time I got to the Meseta, approximately 12 days, 10 days, I don't remember exactly. I understood what it meant to be in an albergue. I had a sense of the daily rhythms. My body had adjusted to the long walking day after day. And then my focus shifted to my mind.
Yeah, you go in internal. You've got all the
Yes.
shuffling and the figuring out done, and you're just so settled into that pilgrim identity and that pilgrim rhythm.
Yes.
And there's that feeling that city of Burgos is just so beautiful with that cathedral. And then you're thinking, okay, I'm about to go out into this meseta, which what is this? Is this a wasteland? Am I off into the oh my gosh, where am I going? And it just this peace seems to settle over you. Yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm trying to
Yes.
decide what I'm going to walk this spring, if I'm going to walk the Meseta or some other part. So I just love
Hmm.
it in the spring. Those are some wonderful insights about what walking your first Camino provides for you, and specifically the Frances, the way that the route is laid out with that first third, Saint Jean to Burgos, Burgos to Leon, Leon to Santiago. I love that, the rhythm of the Frances. But now I'd like to shift to what have you done since then? What else have you done after your first Camino?
I knew after my first that the Camino was not done with me.
Okay.
By the way, it still isn't, but my second Camino was the Portuguese Central, and I started walking from Porto August 5 of last year, 2024, to Santiago. That was 9 or 10 walking days. I had a day in Santiago, and then I walked to Finisterre, then to Machia. And because I underestimated my schedule, I had enough time to walk back to Santiago,
Oh, wow.
which I had heard that if you walk into Santiago on any approved route for at least 100 kilometers, that's worth a Compostela.
So you got a
And
third Compostela?
I have a third Compostela.
Oh, that's fantastic. What was it like to walk back to Santiago from Muxia?
It was literally walking upstream because everybody was going the other direction from Santiago to Muxia and looking at me like, it's that way. You're going the wrong way. No, I'm going back.
Oh my goodness. Oh, yeah. Did you enjoy doing that? Did that feel like an essential part of the journey?
It gave me a sense of completion in the way going around a circle completes a loop,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is a different experience than walking from one place to another, a linear end-to-end walk.
How would you compare and contrast what you just described as that linear route versus a loop or circular route?
What they both have in common is a starting point and a destination. What's different is that the starting point and ending point ended up were the same.
Uh-huh.
One interesting thing, I was having dinner with some a pilgrim in it might have been on the way to Finisterre, and I said, I think I'm going to walk back to Santiago. And he said, but you're going to see the same things all over again. And I said, no, because when you walk in and I know this from hiking locally, when you walk in one direction and then you walk back, you see a very different trail, a very different place. And yeah, there on the way back, there were towns I had passed through, but there were things that I overlooked on the outbound that I noticed on the return.
Interesting. It's a matter of perspective, isn't it?
That's the perfect word.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
much. Yeah.
Well, and I would say after walking the Frances many times, I catch new things every time. I think it's because I'm attuning to different things and alert to
Hmm.
different things. And I also notice, I wonder if you had this experience, I'm different every time. And so what I'm paying attention to is different every time.
Yes, yes. I felt that very much on my second Camino. I was different.
Mm, let's talk about that. How were you different? How would you describe that?
Well, let's go back to the why. My first Camino was for the intention of community, and I
Uh-huh.
found solitude. It was the joy of that solitude that drove me to my second Camino. So what I wanted the second time was a retreat of a Camino, to be by myself. I had heard about the different routes on the Portuguese, that the coastal had become very popular. The central was less popular. I specifically walked the central route to be around fewer people. Not that I disliked the people, I just wanted more of that solitude. Now, as it turns out, there's always a balance. I had a short family. There were a bunch of people who I became friends with. So it wasn't total isolation, but the balance was more solitude. And I got exactly what I wanted the second time.
Ah, I got such an emotional hit when you were talking about that you went for a sense of community, but you found solitude, and then you went for solitude and retreat, and you found it all, it sounds like.
Yes,
Ah,
yes.
wow. That really hit me, Maurice. It's really so beautiful. I know my listeners would love to hear more about your Portuguese walk. What else would you share with us about that?
Well, when I started the walk, I had two questions. One was just how does a first and a second Camino compare? But a more important question was how long will it take me to get into that Camino mindset or headspace that I had found, especially on the Meseta? And the difference in duration of the two walks, 5 weeks for the Francaise versus less than 2 weeks for the Portuguese, I was a little concerned, would that be enough time for me to gain that sense of retreat? And amazingly, and the Camino provides, it was maybe an hour. And I was like shocked. It's like, barely out of Porto and I'm already in my head just where I want to be. That was like so fast. And it took me a couple of days and I thought like, how do I explain this? And I did long training walks for both of my Caminos. And I looked back and I said, those solitary training walks were training me mentally as well as physically.
That's it.
So that by the time I was out of Porto, I was on the Camino fully.
I've had similar experiences every time I go back. Yeah. First stamp, first steps, I'm there.
Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I so love that. That really just, it brings me right back to the experience of being on the Camino and dropping into just the flow of that river. That,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. And swimming with the stream, with the flow of the
Hmm.
river rather than against it feels really very
Hmm.
special. Okay. So, in terms of the Portuguese route compared to the Frances route, if someone were thinking, what should I do for my first Camino? Let's assume there isn't going to be a second one. What advice would you give them for how to choose a route?
Well, assuming you were to start on the Portuguese from Porto, and you can start from Lisbon, and some people do, you can complete a Camino in much less time. And for people who are not retired, still working, have commitments at home, that's an important consideration. Portugal is not Spain. It's a very different country. And to experience that was expanding for me.
Okay.
After 5 weeks in Spain, 1 or 2 days in France at the beginning, but not really enough to, experience France the way I experienced Spain. I was in Portugal a little over a week before crossing the border into Spain. And then I was in a country that was now familiar. So it was sort of a combination of new and known.
Okay.
Whereas Spain was, okay, there's different regions in Spain and they're not the same, but it's still Spain.
Okay. So you get that nice variety, that two for
Yes.
one if you
Yeah.
walk the Portuguese route. And also that time factor is really an important consideration for people who can't dedicate
Right.
30, 40, 50 days to a
Yeah.
pilgrimage. I
Yeah.
like that. I like that. I'm curious about how you prepared for your second Camino. And the reason I'm curious about that is because I remember when you were preparing for your first Camino, you were using my Camino Frances Getting Started audio guide, and you were sending me updates and emails about, hey, this is what's working, and here's how I'm preparing, and this is what I'm test driving, and all of that. Going into your second Camino, that work had already been done. What was different about how you prepared for your second Camino?
It was, whereas the first time it was, this is all new to me. I've got so much to learn. The second time it was, okay, I know how this works, but I've got fine tuning to do. So, for example, I had a rain jacket on the Francaise. It was good for an hour. It was not good for a whole day of rain. I
Okay.
had a much better rain jacket the second Camino,
Okay.
little things like that. I made other small changes in my gear, but it was mostly the same.
Okay.
What was common to both was I take the physical training very seriously. I know to do 15 miles a day, 4 days in a row, as much as I can, so that when I'm there, I'm not struggling.
Okay. And that made a difference for you?
It did make a difference. Yes. Yeah. The other difference was just the whole concept of I've done this before and I know what I'm getting into
Ah.
compared to I have never done anything like this. And I will be having new experiences all the time.
And that's a good thing.
Yes, for me, that was a very good thing.
Very good.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. I like the differences. So one of the things I'm curious about, and I'm really focusing on this year. In fact, you've already completed my survey about after the Camino. I'm really interested in what people do after the Camino for several reasons. One is, does the Camino prompt you to go after another big thing or the next big thing? But also, then how do we bring the Camino back into our everyday lives? So I would love to hear from you, first of all, how you brought the Camino home. And then we're going to talk about your next big plans. So how did you assimilate back home after your first and second Caminos?
I definitely had the after the Camino hangover experience, it's sometimes called. For a week or two, I was still on the Camino. I was physically at home. I was starting to resume my daily activities. I was not here.
Oh boy,
And
do I know that one.
one of my favorite experiences, the very first night I slept at home, like most nights, I got up sometime in the middle of the night, had to use the bathroom, and I looked around and my thought was, where again is the bathroom in this albergue? And then I had to say, no, this is not an albergue. You are home. You know where it is. And
Perfect.
that that to me was so symbolic of being in transition. I found going back to my local group,
Hmm.
to the pilgrims who were there, who understood me,
Yeah.
was so helpful.
Okay.
And I was there in a different way. Before I was there as a student, I am learning, I'm asking questions, I'm listening in on conversations. And that coming back, I was a pilgrim. I was
Yeah.
I was really a pilgrim. The other thing I did, well, and this was very intentional, when I was on the Camino, I had a blog for family and friends. I had notes of various kinds for myself. I had my photos, which I organized day by day. And 2 months after I was back, it turned out to be Sunday the 17th in that month. And I started going through all my digital memories day by day. It took 36 days, and that kept my memories alive.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and the other thing I would say, one little thing, my Camino clothes gained of they are now like relics of my life. And I would put those pants on or put a shirt on, And I would say to myself, this shirt went across Spain with me. It did that journey. It was a part of me then, and it's still a part of me now.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, we get really attached to the things that went with us, like our backpacks are part of our bodies now. And
Oh, oh,
our trekking
definitely.
poles are our best
Yeah.
friends.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love that perspective. Yeah. Okay. So keeping the memories alive, connecting with other pilgrims, and really remembering, consciously, intentionally remembering the journey is what I'm hearing.
Yes, and one more thing is it's not like the Camino was done for me. I still read the forums. I continued reading memoirs, and I would stay involved as much as I could, and I still do that to this day.
Okay. Okay. So now let's talk about the next big thing that you're doing. And you haven't said it yet, but you shared this with me. There's this new thing you know about yourself. Would you share with us about that and who that person is?
Yes, and this really solidified the second Camino, more than the first, but I am now a long distance walker, whether that's a Camino or other kinds of trails, to go out and be walking for a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever. That's now part of my identity. It's something I do. Interesting what my friends picked up on it even before I did. They would ask me, "Where are you going this year?" Like they just assumed you've done this twice, you're going to do this again.
All right. So you are a long distance walker. It's sort of who you are now. So what's next? Where are you headed off to?
I am going to walk from one side of England to the other on the England coast to coast path in North England. I'll be doing that from late May of this year to early June. It's about 190 miles. I've got a 16-day itinerary. It's not like the Camino in that there are towns along the way, but not every couple of kilometers. So
Okay.
booking ahead was necessary. So that's different for me. I've got the whole trip mapped out. I used a company to do that for me. So I just have to show up and do the walking. I'll be staying in a bed and breakfast, but I'll be seeing England from one side to the other. I am so excited.
That's so exciting. Do you have any connection to England?
Just a lifelong fascination with the country since I was a teenager.
Okay.
No ancestors that I know of, never done genealogy or anything like that. It just feels like the mother country.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a strong connection to England as well. My grandfather on my mother's side was born there
Mhm.
and then came to the US and my mom was born here. And my brother, I've shared this story before. My brother was born in Paris because my parents were living in Paris and then they were married in London. And then for some mysterious reason they came back to the US. I'm still kind of mad about that, but what are you going to do? All right, so I'm imagining Maurice the pilgrim, the Camino pilgrim, going onto this other trail, this walking trail that's a long distance trail, but it's not a Camino pilgrimage. Who's going? What are you going to bring to that route and to those people who you meet walking that trail? What's that picture? Can you paint that for us?
That's a good question. It's a very popular trail in England. I expect to meet a lot of people. I hope that there are people who walk the same pace that I do, that I see them in a couple of towns and then you become familiar and then you become friends. I'm open to that happening. If it does, great. If it doesn't, it that's fine too. And while it's not a Camino in the sense that, it's one of the trails, routes sanctioned by the church, it will also be a pilgrimage for me. And my whole evolution has involved the concept of pilgrimage. I have to say, when I first walked on the Francaise for about a week, people would use the word pilgrim. It didn't fit well. It felt like I was wearing somebody else's clothes. I eventually came to terms with that. And from research I did afterwards into pilgrimage, reading the book by Phil Cousineau that you recommended, and a couple of others, and learning what does pilgrimage really mean, what I came to see is there's the traditional religious pilgrimage, and then there's a personal kind of pilgrimage that I go to what for me is a sacred place, which doesn't need to be physical. For me, it's a state of mind. And that's where the retreat comes back. So, I look forward to this walk as being away from my daily life, more in touch with myself. And as happened before, when I come back, I see my normal daily life differently, and I appreciate it even more.
That's the prize right there. That's the golden ring, as we say. Yeah. Oh, that book that you mentioned is called The Art of Pilgrimage by Phil Cousineau, and I'll put that in the show notes so people have
Yes.
that. That's the book that rearranged my thinking around pilgrimage after I'd walked maybe one or two times. And I found that book on a friend's bookshelf in Germany. And I was so hungry for English language books. I was like, give me that. I practically ate the book. I was so excited. And yeah, it just rearranged how I saw pilgrimage, that inner journey. And I love the title, The Art of Pilgrimage. And that sounds like to me, that's what you're easing into or you have settled into is the art and your soul just going on this journey that isn't going to end just because you finished the route.
That's such an important point. Yeah, I hear people say, oh, life is a Camino and the Camino doesn't end. And that's different for every person. And I'm still finding out what that means for me. I have a long way to go.
Ah, well, that's good to know because I'm glad you're going to be around for a while doing it. Yeah. Anything else you'd like to share about your three walks?
One of the important parts of my second Camino, and I built in time for this, was volunteering at the Pilgrim House in Santiago. I had heard about it. Originally, one of the podcasts interviewed Nate and Faith, the founders, who
Uh-huh.
I was fortunate to meet and work with. So I liked having extra time in Santiago at the end, and I wanted to give back as we've talked about. And I contacted them. I said, I only have 4 days, I only have a couple of days. And they said, fine, come. And I was there and I learned a little bit about the background of the place and more about what it does. And I had been there after my first Camino Frances as just a pilgrim. So I knew it from that side. And it was such a meaningful and satisfying experience. Pilgrims would come in, we would talk, just giving them little cup of coffee, something like that. It was just, I'm so glad I did that.
Let's start at the beginning. Will you share with us what Pilgrim House is and what their mission is?
Certainly. So Pilgrim House, people think, oh, it's an albergue. No, it's not a place to stay. It's a welcome center. You can spend your day there. You can spend a couple of hours. They have many services, like you can leave your backpack, you can get laundry done, you can print boarding passes. They also have every afternoon a group discussion for people who want to reflect on their pilgrimage and think through it with others. They also do individual conversations. I took advantage of that my first time there, and it was very helpful. And they just have a lot of practical information if you need a restaurant recommendation or you need a doctor. or even just another place to stay, they'll help you with that.
Excellent. Yeah, it's such a lovely place. I remember when they were getting ready to open, I think they worked for something like 10 years to bring this vision into fruition. And they've just created such a beautiful space. I think that isn't that they have a back room that's just for reflection. So if you just want to go and be in silence and solitude, you can sit back there. Is that, do I remember that correctly?
Yes, in fact, I spent a lot of time in the back room. Now, the front room is for community, so they
Okay.
have couches, you can interact with other people. And the back room is more for reflection. There's a library. I sat there. I read a lot of my notes after my first Camino, and it was a very special place.
Yeah, I highly recommend a visit to Pilgrim House. And we should probably mention their opening days. They're open 5 days a week, closed on Sunday and Wednesday, I believe. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things we overlook in our planning of the Camino is time in Santiago. And a lot of
Mhm.
times I think people think, oh, I don't like cities. I don't want to be in that big city environment. But there's something really beneficial about actually pausing before you leave the Camino and before you head off to that crazy world of travel and then back to your home life. And there are other things available in Santiago. There's the Camino companions. Did you interact with them at all at the Pilgrim's office?
Yes, after my second Camino, the Portuguese, because when I arrived in late October, they had already stopped their season, ended their season.
Okay.
I missed Camino Companions the first time, but I did go there the second time.
Okay. I'd love to hear about your experience with them the second time you were there.
Well, it was a relatively small room, and there were a couple of volunteers and a couple of different pilgrims in conversation with the volunteers. I was able to have a very nice conversation with an Irish volunteer, and it helped me sort through some things. And first thing she did was, "Can I make you a cup of tea?" And that was just really nice. And I'm so glad I went. And
Great.
and I want to follow up a point you just made. One of the things I learned, and I'm so glad I did this, I had one day in Saint Jean Pied de Port before I began, and then I had days in Santiago after my first Camino, and I repeated that with an extra day in Porto before walking and extra time in Santiago after. And I find those extra days to be so important for gaining a sense of place before I begin and for the transition back home.
Yes. Yes. Let your spirit catch up with your body so that everything's in one place before you begin and everything's in one place before you leave.
Oh, so well said.
I think that's so important. Yes, definitely. All right. Let's see. I'll have in the show notes, I'll put information about Pilgrim House and Camino Companion so people can connect with them when in Santiago. I do think it's worth at least 2 nights in Santiago. And then this funny thing happens after, say, the second night when you're on your second full day or then to your third full day, you start to not recognize anybody because everybody you walked in with has left and moved on. But I think that also affords the opportunity to just go within and settle into the experience because what people are learning when they get home is there's so much to process and so much to think through and remember and record and just process. There's no better way to say it. Or I like how my friend Joy says it: unpack your Camino. And so I think if you can pause in Santiago and step away from the celebratory experience, because there definitely is a lot of celebrating going on in Santiago, and have some quiet, reflective time. Maybe walk through the park or walk out on the trail, even if you only go, an hour outside of Santiago on the Trail de Fistera. At least get some reflective time. Yeah.
That's so true. And what I found was not walking. Well, first, it felt very weird after walking 36 days not to walk for,
Yeah.
for 4 days. But Not being in motion helped me catch up with so much that had accumulated during the 5 weeks of walking.
I think you just hit it, Maurice. Not being in motion is an important element of the end of your Camino. And how
Hmm.
do you process that? How do you integrate that lack of motion? Ah, it's really good. We could spend some time on that one, couldn't we?
Very much.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I just love your insights. I love your perspective. And I absolutely love having seen you from before your first Camino to now after your second one. It's just, it's like getting to know you all over again. So I really appreciate it.
And thank you for everything you've done. Your podcast and your audio guide and all your other materials have been so helpful to me. And I really cherish our connection.
I do as well, Maurice. Thank you so much. And thanks for saying that. I really enjoy being able to serve the pilgrim community. Thank you. All right, we'll say goodbye there. And yeah, do you want to say goodbye?
Buen camino.
Muchas gracias. Y tú también. Thanks, Maurice.
Thank you, Nancy.